I was always loyal. That's the word people used. Loyal friend. Loyal partner. Loyal employee. Loyal son. Loyalty followed me everywhere, like a compliment I never questioned. And for a long time, I wore it with pride. Because loyalty sounds like strength. It sounds like character. It sounds like someone who doesn't abandon people when things get difficult. What no one ever told me is that loyalty can become a hiding place. I didn't betray anyone. I didn't walk away when it got uncomfortable. I didn't choose myself at someone else's expense. I didn't make selfish decisions that required apologies. I stayed. Again and again. When relationships became draining, I stayed. When expectations grew heavier, I stayed. When my own needs started whispering instead of speaking, I stayed. I told myself this was maturity. That real life isn't about what you want, it's about what you commit to. Commitment became my identity. And slowly, quietly, it replaced me. From the outside, my life looked solid. I was dependable. Predictable. The kind of person others could rely on without worrying that I'd disappear. People felt safe with me. I wasn't sure I felt anything at all. I noticed it first in moments of decision. When a choice appeared that involved me, not others, not responsibilities, just me, my instinct wasn't curiosity. It was hesitation. Not because I didn't want anything. Because wanting felt disloyal. Wanting implied that something I had committed to wasn't enough. So I learned how to want less. I learned how to adjust my desires downward until they fit neatly inside the lives I was already holding together. I told myself this was sacrifice. And sometimes it was. But sacrifice without consent becomes erosion. I stopped asking myself what I needed because the answer rarely fit into the structure I had built. I stopped imagining different futures because they felt like betrayals of the present. I told myself, this is what responsibility looks like. And responsibility has a powerful effect. It silences doubt by framing it as weakness. It reframes dissatisfaction as ingratitude. It turns self-denial into virtue. I became very good at that. So good that I didn't notice when loyalty stopped being a choice and became a reflex. I didn't stay because I believed in what I was staying for. I stayed because leaving felt wrong. Wrong felt dangerous. I remember sitting on a train late one night, watching darkness rush past the window, and feeling a strange disconnect. I was moving, but I had no sense of direction. I was going somewhere but not toward myself. That thought unsettled me. Because it suggested something I didn't want to admit. I had built a life based on who needed me, not on who I was. Every major decision I had made could be justified by loyalty. To a person. To a role. To an expectation. To a version of myself that prided itself on endurance. Endurance became my proof of worth. The longer I stayed, the more justified it felt. Leaving would have meant questioning everything I had invested in time, energy, identity. Leaving would have meant admitting that loyalty had cost me something essential. So I didn't leave. I told myself I didn't need to. I told myself this was what a good life looked like: stable, committed, unselfish. I told myself that everyone feels this quiet heaviness sometimes. What I didn't tell myself was the truth that slowly took shape beneath those explanations. I didn't know who I was outside of my commitments. That realization terrified me. Because if loyalty was the only thing holding my life together, then choosing myself might unravel everything. And I wasn't ready to face what might be left if I stopped being the reliable one. So I kept going. Fulfilling roles. Honoring expectations. Showing up even when something inside me felt increasingly absent. I wasn't unhappy. That was the problem. Unhappiness would have justified change. What I felt was a slow thinning, like my presence was being stretched across too many obligations until there was barely anything left in the center. I didn't collapse. I complied. And compliance is quiet. It doesn't announce loss. It doesn't trigger alarms. It just keeps asking for a little more of you until you forget there was ever a choice. The night on that train, surrounded by strangers who would never know me, a thought formed that I couldn't dismiss. If I stopped being loyal to everyone else, would there be anything left of me to be loyal to? That question didn't accuse me. It waited. And I knew that once I answered it honestly, I wouldn't be able to keep calling my life a series of good decisions. Because loyalty, I was starting to realize, had kept me dependable, but it had also kept me invisible to myself. After that night, loyalty stopped feeling noble. It started feeling heavy. Not immediately at first, it was just a subtle shift. A discomfort I couldn't name. Like a word that suddenly sounds wrong when you repeat it too many times. I kept living the same way. I kept showing up. I kept doing what was expected. From the outside, nothing changed. Inside, everything felt strained. I began to notice how often my decisions were made automatically, without consultation. Not consultation with others, with myself. I didn't ask what I wanted. I asked what was required. What would keep things stable? What would avoid disappointment? Loyalty had trained me to prioritize continuity over truth. I told myself this was integrity. But integrity implies choice. What I was practicing was obedience. I realized how deeply I feared being seen as unreliable. The idea of disappointing someone made my chest tighten. Not because I loved them deeply, but because my sense of worth depended on being consistent. I needed people to be able to count on me. Because if they couldn't, I didn't know what I was for. That thought unsettled me. I started observing my reactions when someone asked something of me. There was no pause, no space to consider. The answer formed instantly. Yes. I'll handle it. Don't worry. Those words came out before I even registered the request. My body said yes before my mind arrived. I didn't experience this as generosity. I experienced it as pressure. Pressure to remain who I had always been. Pressure to uphold the version of myself everyone trusted. Pressure to keep the structure intact. I began to feel resentment, quiet, controlled, carefully hidden. Resentment toward expectations that were never explicitly stated, but always present. Resentment toward the assumption that I would stay, absorb, endure. I didn't express it. Resentment doesn't disappear when you ignore it. It turns inward. I started criticizing myself for feeling tired. For wanting space. For fantasizing about a life where I didn't owe so much of myself to others. I told myself those thoughts were selfish. I told myself real adults don't think like that. I told myself loyalty means staying even when it costs you. But something inside me began to question that logic. If loyalty requires the erasure of self, what exactly are you being loyal as? I couldn't answer that. I noticed how rarely anyone asked me what I needed. Not because they didn't care, but because I never made it visible that I had needs. I had trained people to see me as self-sufficient. As emotionally stable. As someone who didn't require much maintenance. That image felt safe. It also felt lonely. I realized how much of my emotional life happened internally, without witnesses. How often I processed disappointment, exhaustion, and doubt in isolation, not because I wanted privacy, but because I didn't want to disrupt the balance. Balance had become sacred. I began to see that I had confused harmony with health. Harmony avoids conflict. Health can withstand it. My life was harmonious, smooth, predictable, quiet. And I was disappearing inside it. I started thinking about the version of myself I had been before loyalty became my defining trait. Before I learned that being dependable earned approval. Before I learned that staying was praised more than leaving. That version felt distant. Not because it was gone, but because I hadn't visited it in years. I realized how much of my identity was built around endurance. How proud I was of how much I could carry without complaining. How much I equated suffering silently with moral strength. No one had asked me to do that. I had volunteered. And now, I didn't know how to stop. I imagined what would happen if I said no. Not dramatically, just once. What would break? Who would be disappointed? How much tension would surface? The imagined consequences felt unbearable. Which made something painfully clear: my life was organized around avoiding discomfort for others and for myself. Avoidance had become my compass. I wasn't choosing loyalty anymore. I was avoiding the guilt of choosing myself. That realization was devastating, because it meant my virtue wasn't as pure as I thought. My sacrifices weren't always about love or commitment. Sometimes they were about fear. Fear of conflict. Fear of judgment. Fear of discovering that if I stopped being useful, I might become optional. That fear kept me in place. It also kept me from growing. I started to feel trapped, not by people, not by circumstances, but by the identity I had built so carefully. The loyal one. The reliable one. The one who never leaves. If I changed, I would betray that identity. And I didn't know who I would be without it. That's when I understood the depth of the problem. I wasn't afraid of losing people. I was afraid of losing the version of myself they depended on. Because underneath that version, I wasn't sure there was anything solid left. The truth I didn't want to face was this: loyalty had given my life meaning when I didn't know how to create it myself. It filled the space where desire should have been. It gave me direction when I didn't trust my own. But now, it was suffocating me. I could feel it in the way my chest tightened when I imagined a different life. In the guilt that rose whenever I considered prioritizing myself. In the exhaustion that no amount of rest seemed to fix. I wasn't tired because I was doing too much. I was tired because I was never choosing. I began to see how dangerous that was. Because a life built entirely on loyalty has no center. It orbits others endlessly. And I was starting to feel dizzy from the constant rotation. I didn't know yet how to change this. I didn't know how to choose myself without feeling like a traitor. But I knew one thing with absolute clarity: staying loyal to everyone else had slowly taught me how to abandon myself. And once you see that pattern, every act of doing the right thing starts to feel less like virtue, and more like avoidance.